Do you worry about ransomware, data breaches, reputation damage, especially from phishing attacks on employees working from home? The facts are, top cloud security tools have a 15% failure rate. 51% of phishing is social media based. Pixum knows because Pixum detects and stops breaches at point of click. Pixum's AI real-time solution detects actual fraud happening in a browser and stops it. Know your real security gaps. Get a phishing actualization test free at securityweekly.com/Pixum. That's PIXM. Cybercriminals are using social engineering loaded with urgency and fear to successfully prey on victims, your employees, or your customers. Protect your Office 365 email from today's most sophisticated attacks with Barracuda Email Threat Scanner. It's a free tool to help protect your business from these hard-to-detect attacks. The Barracuda Email Threat Scanner uses artificial intelligence to hunt and eliminate Office 365 email threats. Find the cybersecurity threats hiding in your Office 365 email right now. Get your free email threat scan at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. To all of our listeners out there, if you would like to subscribe to all of the shows on the Security Weekly network, there are several out there. You can subscribe to our main feed, which has many of our shows in it, or individually. Each of the shows have their own feed that you can subscribe to with your favorite podcast catcher. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel if you like to watch the videos. Sign up for our mailing list, join our Discord server, and you can also watch our live streams on Twitch. Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December 5th through the 8th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista Hotel. Call for presentations. A deadline has been extended through July 23rd, so get your submissions in. securityweekly.com/unlocked. Submit your presentation. Alrighty, on to the enterprise security news. I would like to start with Rapid7's acquisition of Intsights and just say, we called it. They listened to us, Adrian.
Yeah. No, it was a big question, this very much feels like a market, this attacks surface management market, like something that the vulnerability management vendors should already be into.
Yep.
And one thing I know about the business side of cybersecurity is that acquisition offers for these startups are coming in weekly. Like they're just always getting hammered by, we want to invest in your next round, we want to acquire you. Stuff like that, so a lot of these startups are having to field these constantly. And usually when we say something like that, those conversations are actually going on. It's just in private spaces, so we're not aware of it.
To me, this one makes sense to have attack surface monitoring attached to a vulnerability management platform, which the big three, two of the three have diversified. Rapid7 and Qualys have diversified. And we just heard from Qualys. Mm-hmm. It sounds like Qualys is integrating and starting to build this functionality. It actually wouldn't surprise me if Qualys were the next one to make an acquisition in this space, as they're just announcing their cybersecurity asset monitoring, capabilities. I think they're going to, sounds like they're starting with acquisitions. My speculation, I have no inside knowledge at all. My speculation, they'll be next to make an acquisition in the attack surface monitoring space. Rapid7 has made one with Intsights for $335 million. And I think it really makes sense to understand your attack surface and then integrate that with your vulnerability management tools, which now, as we know, especially in Qualys and Rapid7's case, extend far beyond just traditional vulnerability management. Each of those two companies has extensive modules for things like containers, web applications, all of this functionality that's built into that suite. Patching, Qualys has patching, which is, how great would it be, right?
Yeah.
If that's just bundled in, like my attack surface monitoring is running, and then I come in the morning and here's my patch dashboard, like, oh, that's exposed to the internet. I got to go deploy the patch.
Yeah, and I think the reason you don't see that more is those are different buyers. The team doing the patching, is often not security related, and maybe they don't even talk to security that much or don't like security that much. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, it does make sense. Especially if you've got good leadership, good culture in your organization. You don't have that adversarial relationship between security and IT. It does make sense for that to be attached, and to have a strong integration there, and some automation around that. But I think the key here is, traditionally vulnerability management tools. I remember having a client where with our clients, we would actually help make sure that their tools were correctly configured. And in one case, we found, they had Rapid7 scanning their websites, and 13 of the 14 websites were misspelled. They're missing the M on .com.
Right.
It was just some kind of crazy typo where the M on .com got left out of 13 of the 14. So They were scanning one website, and because they were getting some results, they managed to miss that error for, I forget how long it sat there. And that's the whole premise of attack surface management is you don't necessarily know what to put in that input box. You don't necessarily know what to tell your scanner to go out and scan, because you don't know about the stuff you don't know about. So that's an important move, I think, for the vulnerability management space.
This is one of their fourth acquisitions too, so I think this is pretty par for course on a lot of these big companies. They're having to acquire to stay relevant at the size they're at for wherever the market's moving. Attack surface management being kind of the hot thing right now, and honestly, Intsights is a pretty awesome company anyway. I think they were poised to go IPO if they didn't get acquired pretty quick. I think they're Series D, right? So they were getting ready to either IPO or have someone big buy them, and I think this was a good purchase. Honestly, $335 million with a Series D at $30 million. That's a pretty accurate funding round to acquisition. So good for them.
Yeah, because you're picking up a lot of great tech and likely some good customers and sales at that scale, right? If you're in the Series D. I mean, you've got customers and you know how to sell. You're
mature. You're either going IPO or like someone's going to acquire you.
And Rapid7 makes great choices. Qualys does as well with acquisitions. When I've analyzed both respective companies' acquisitions, they're very smart. They're very well played.
And this is the third one in the space that I know of, at least. We saw Expanse go for $800 million, I think, to Palo Alto, and the official announcement for Microsoft and RiskIQ. I don't think there's an actual number out there, but it's rumored to be between $500 million and $1 billion for that acquisition. And this one's $335 million. Really, really healthy space in terms of exits.
Agreed. Let's see. I want to talk about adversary emulation. I haven't talked about SafeBreach in a while. They've added support for new advanced attacks to the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint Evaluation Lab. Tyler, have you played with this, or Adrian?
Yeah, it's pretty fun. It's pretty crazy what they're doing with the ability to do. You're essentially able to configure a lab in a safe environment with a lot of the configurations that you may be using in your endpoint, and then you can test different scenarios again. This is kind of like a detection lab or one of the MITRE evaluation labs or sandbox labs, but you're able to test very specific TTPs, very specific attack groups or threat actors. And they've added a bunch of new ones in there with like ATP-29s in there. I know they just added the SolarGate one, which is pretty big, and then Carbank and Fin7. So if you're in the fintech, that's pretty big for that standpoint. But it just gives you lab access to configure a lot of things in a very safe manner. That's highly gives you good visibility as what's your ability to defend against these different attacks and the visibility around those.
So how does it work? Do I spin up Evaluation Lab and then put my config and software in it?
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep. Very, very similar to that. And it allows you to do some specific like O365 configurations as well, to see what you need to have in there for very specific attack mitigations or attack surface reduction rules, what you're trying to apply there, and what's going to affect different software packages.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's I hadn't heard of it before. You threw the story in there, and it sounds extremely cool. It's going to save folks so much time. And it looks like So what this announcement is about is you can basically check a box and say, I want to bring SafeBreach into this, and it looks like AttackIQ is also an option here for simulators. So you kind of bringing your own license to it.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's a great thing that they're doing with Microsoft 365 Security Group. Is just they're killing it in all aspects. So where they're bringing the full team aspect of different groups and configurations, and then being able to test that in a safe environment, like that's pretty huge for some places that just don't have the time to scale dev environments, lab environments, to do very contained testing with inside of the corporate environment. This is pretty awesome.
Yeah, you don't want the actual attack to be the first test on your controls, right?
Yes.
Probably not the best place to start.
Yeah.
Well, I think it gives you a good baseline too. I mean, and a lot of these tests are well defined and prescriptive, right? I think there was another one that I had, maybe it was that story where I was like, yeah, you can detect all that stuff, but that's a very specific attack. But if you can't simulate and detect and figure it out, then you're not going to be able to detect what's coming at you next that you don't know about. So,
well, and my issue with all the detection stuff is like how many attacks have we seen where vendors are like, we detected that, but it doesn't matter if nobody saw it and acted on it.
Right.
That's the piece that's missing. Sure, you've got the tool, sure, it's correctly configured, but when it matters, is someone going to notice? Is somebody going to see that one event, that one alert pop up? And are they going to do the right things when they do see it? And is that all going to happen fast enough to make a difference? Like, those are the open questions that we need, to do more simulations, do more practicing. My latest thing is I keep seeing, security operations like, an IR, like a sport. Like we've got to practice at this. We've got to have some level of confidence, that the tools work. We're going to see stuff and be able to react in time to make a difference.
Absolutely.
So we got to practice, man.
Oh, it was my story number 5. Armis secures 100% visibility to OT, ICS, and IT assets in the MITRE Engenuity attack evaluations for industrial control systems.
Yeah, the new MITRE IoT is really cool. I'm glad they've kind of rolled that over and incorporated it. Claiming 100%, that's it's fairly new. I get why they did it, but
everybody should be getting 100% because they let the vendors, they give them as much time as they need to set up the product, and like they get to enable all the things. So this is, and this dovetails with what I'm talking about. So absolutely, in a lab, you can detect 100% of the stuff,
right?
Because there's no timer running. There's no time limit for you to find it. You already know what you're going to be looking for in most of these MITRE attack evaluations. You know exactly what threat actor it is. You know what ransomware and stuff like that you're up against in these evaluations. So I don't want to downplay it. I mean, it's still useful. Absolutely, you want to know that these products can functionally detect this stuff. But the important next step is it going to happen in your company, with your team, with your resources?
Really making sure too, like one of the downsides I see to MITRE, like it gives good visibility. It provides a good baseline so that people know things that they should be detecting, because it was the case that not everybody knows what they don't know. But really coming back to the behavior and heuristics, like not getting so focused on IOCs and making sure that like all these little IOCs, you can detect T 100 through 1000, whatever. But are you at a baseline? If I change any of those variables within inside of those tactics, are you able to detect the behavior? Do you have the high level visibility to see things outside of the baseline that MITRE is providing? Because hackers are creative. We're always going to find a way around an EDR product. We're always going to find a nuance that's going to allow us to execute. So are you detecting on those behaviors and not focusing so much on the IOCs? And I think that's that's kind of the spirit of what MITRE is, but everybody is taking it very, very literal. Like I can detect all of these IOCs without thinking about, okay, so is it the heuristics or the behavior that's associated with those IOCs that we need to be evaluating, and can we see a wider breadth than what the IOCs are providing?
And I think that's a space that folks like AttackIQ and SafeBreach need to fill. Like they need to do a good job of emulating, that kind of creativity that attackers have. And, at one level, absolutely, they can do the functional testing, make sure your stuff is turned on, it's plugged in, it's got the correct span port, which legitimately is still a big issue these days. I still hear stories of people plugging in an NDRs or, something like that into the wrong span port, and they're not getting the traffic they think they're getting. But the next step, beyond functional testing is, testing against the actual threats that are out there, and I'm still very bullish and excited about the breach and attack simulation folks in providing that.
Absolutely. Oh, I was going to say incident response is important too, right? I mean, you can have your tools tuned to discover certain attacks or even generic attacks, but it comes down to response. How quickly do you get that notification, verify that it's real, and actually respond to an incident? There's some great stories out there where you can have a very poorly configured environment, but if you've got an expert that kind of knows what's going on, they can stop that ransomware. In this case, the case I'm thinking of, they stopped it the second time. And then,
there was a Twitter thread, that I was involved in. Dino DeZovi was in it also, where, kind of the premise of the thread was how comfortable are you with fully automated responses?
Yeah.
Like taking a system offline, like if you, and it all comes down to confidence, and they're saying, like, if the confidence is like 99%, are you comfortable taking these systems offline? And a lot of the responses, like in the DevOps and cloud world, people are like, well, if this is one system in like a high availability cluster or something like that, absolutely. Like I can kill 3 out of 5 and be fine, and just spin up a new version.
That is until the attacker figures that out and can just DOS you.
I made that point.
Right?
I made that point.
But we're always concerned about, with the automation that is blocking or taking things offline automatically.
Then you've created a denial of service tool against yourself.
You need to have an anti-denial of service mechanism when you're applying that much automation. And I think more advanced teams certainly are aware of that and have that. But I think you get into very advanced levels of automation and processes and technology working together to go, wait, you can't kill everything.
Yeah, it's a tough position to be in, because if you're up against fully automated software, humans are going to lose that fight. They're going to lose that race.
Yeah, it's true. The attackers are using similar methodologies. What else we got in here?
Well, since we were talking about AttackIQ, they've got a raise. That's one of my stories in here. They raised $44 million. They're at Series C, so it's not been a huge market, but seems to be a fairly successful market. They seem to be getting traction, and interested to see, like, from the beginning. I haven't been super sure what the exit looks like for breach and attack simulation vendors. I don't know what kind of vendors they go to. So maybe we see some of the, at least 1 or 2 of these IPO or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd almost lump that in with vulnerability management.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
I'm surprised it's not more. It's not more, honestly. Like, AttackIQ is doing some very unique things, and this space seems to be a huge area. 44 million on Series C for a company that's got pretty good market visibility and is doing very unique things seems a little low. Maybe they don't need it, which it could be a good indicator of where they're at. And they're attracting a ton of talent, so again, it could also be an indicator of where they're at. But I'm very surprised it's not a bigger number than that.
Yeah, it seemed like a modest raise, given
really
the space
does,
and the size
especially
of the
for them.
Yeah.
It's an interesting raise too. Saudi Aramco Energy Ventures was one of the investors here. So I mean, really tough to tell. Like we saw Bit Discovery raise probably the smallest Series A that we've seen, or was it a Series B? I can't remember now. But
Jeremiah, he was very transparent about the. But
we know that's a positive sign there. It's not always a good sign. More often than not, I cringe when I see some of these huge raises.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, I'm not sure they're going to get that, on the opposite end, when they eventually exit. I'm not sure those investors are going to see anything back on that.
Yeah. I think my advice to, if you've got technically sound founders is, and I was just advising a company yesterday, telling them this, I'm like, when you take a raise, you can take that money, you can put it into engineering. And like, I'm so confident, like you can go solve problems in engineering and be successful. I'm like, but almost always attached to all these raises, you got to go build out a sales team and a sales process and sales and marketing.
Yeah.
And especially for technology people, like that's hard. Like we can go solve problems on Linux and Windows and all that stuff. And, if we beat our heads against the wall enough and get enough talented people, we'll fix and solve those problems. But it's a different problem when you get to how do you enable a sales team to convey marketing to convey your point of view to the market and actually make and close deals. That's hard.
And then dealing with customers after that. You now have a product, you've got customer support, you've got contracts, so you're going to have to bring in lawyers and counsel.
Yep.
You've got a lot more, you've got all the business things that no one likes to deal with that cost a lot of money and are a net loss. They're a burn.
Yep.
And the product may be great, but the other side of that is where I see a lot of companies either fail and or burn through cash quicker than they anticipated.
Right, because you got to be able to re-sign your customers. You got to have that reoccurring revenue to stay healthy.
It's all just in time, so it's super tough to know if you've raised enough. Right. A lot of people say, like the last thing you want to do is have to go back and start raising again 6 months after a raise because that's a huge effort just to raise that money. It's very distracting, and oftentimes it's founders and CEOs that are, deeply distracted with that, instead of building the company, making sure, quality is there and stuff like that.
That's what I think makes things a very special unicorn, having not done any raises, but being wildly successful still.
Yeah, and it's, I've often thought, can anybody reproduce that? And I think the answer is generally no.
I agree.
You have to be in the right space with the right product, with the right team.
Yep.
And you do you need a Haroon at the head of a company like that, someone that evokes the right level of trust. That a lot of CISOs and has a good network. And right off the bat, you've got a lot of people saying, "Oh, Haroon built something. Absolutely, I'll try that out."
Yeah.
Not all companies are going to have that. That kind of culture around it. But it definitely works for a lot that we've seen.
I want to talk about Intezer quickly, the malware analysis experience. They're analyzing non-binary formats, Office documents, PDFs, sandboxing, mapping capabilities to MITRE attack. They've got a really cool platform that looks at the DNA, basically, of malware. And they do some really cool research as well. I generally like them as a company. I think it's a really cool service. To tell you, basically they tell you whether it's malware or not, and then the lineage of the malware, which I think is important.
It's very, very insightful what they can gather from some of the sandbox stuff they do, and they've got a pretty good base of analysis, both dynamic and some of the static stuff that they're pulling out of what's in your malware. So it's impressive. It's a pain in my ass, but it's pretty cool as far as how they're doing it.
Yeah, because once your code gets in there, then all variations of your code can get in there. They'd be identified through
code or code you've shared and borrowed. Like, it is a nightmare from your stuff getting out and getting signatured very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think malware analysis is very cool. And I've used a lot of tools like this over the years, and But I think we have the benefit of hindsight now that we know this is not a big market. There are not a lot of companies, with security teams large enough to have the luxury of being able to analyze malware. Most people, it's just put out a fire, move on to the next one. Like either tell me it's malware or not.
Right.
But I think you don't see a ton of businesses still excited about their malware sandbox appliances, right?
It's got to be bolted onto something like a next-gen firewall where they're doing dynamic analysis of things coming in or attachments being live scanned. Those
like Wildfire for Palo Alto. Yeah,
exactly. I see them either getting acquired or getting bolted onto a bunch of other stuff for more dynamic analysis, or getting integrated into something that's using like a ML for very sophisticated analysis and heuristic comparisons. That's where it really it gets really interesting when you start to add some of the ML pieces into both the offensive and defensive layers of how malware is going to start behaving and what mitigations and or evasions are going to start to take place in order to be effective.
Yeah.
I did want to talk about Bugcrowd and their recent award of a patent. I just think it's cool. I like to call it out sometimes when folks get awarded a patent.
An interesting patent too, right?
Yeah. It says common service infrastructure, workflow orchestration, cross-organizational analytics to secure innovation.
Okay.
Wow. Well, you get into patent language. It's not developed by tech people. It's developed by lawyers.
Patents are its own language.
Validate Bugcrowd's unique ability to leverage and integrate the expertise of the crowd with its platform common service infrastructure.
Yeah, crowdsourcing the curation of bugs. That's how I was reading.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool. They awarded a patent on it.
It's interesting how that's going to play into the bug bounty ecosystem, and does that affect other people utilizing crowdsourced bug bounty hunting like that? I'm curious what the patent actually provides protection for and or provides implications to other companies around.
Yeah, I mean, patents can help with the value of the company, especially when you start getting close to exit, but in itself, unless you're willing to throw tons of lawyers at it and enforce it, I'm just not sure that's the best spend of funds for HackerOne and Bugcrowd to start battling it out in the courts. So I don't know. It depends.
Plenty of bugs for everybody.
It can be super important or completely meaningless, all depending on whether or not they're willing to throw lawyers at other companies and enforce it.
Maybe it's a long-term play just to keep protection around it if it gets out of hand. I don't know. It was kind of interesting. I think the other one that was interesting is the passwordless authentication. I definitely wanted to hit that one. I think it was Ex-Plaid employees for Stytch, I think is how you pronounce their name.
Oh, yeah.
That was a interesting one. The premise, you see a lot of the companies kind of moving to this API level, one-time passwordless authentication like WhatsApp. There's a ton of companies, and even banks are starting to integrate these SDKs that just send you a text message with your password. So there's no real password involved to get breached, which I think is a great idea. This is what we've been talking about, evolving away from the password. I'm just not 100% sold on how the security of this works or the validation or verification side. I think it's still a little immature, but I think it is a step in the right direction. As long as these things cannot be manipulated and or intercepted or spoofed, or phone numbers registered, multiple phone numbers registered. There's a bunch of different bypasses this. It doesn't solve all the problems, but I think it's a step in the right direction from a breach standpoint, and passwords kind of being the de facto securing all of our stuff. So I think 30 million is a pretty conservative number. This is not the only company doing this, but I think these guys obviously have a pretty good niche in the market to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, Plaid is huge, so yeah, I mean, this is potentially, could be a very big business that you see just integrated into everything. And, coming from the team at Plaid, I think the key problem they're going after here is not necessarily solving security problems, but solving friction problems, because dealing with passwords, in a lot of applications is still incredibly painful. They make you come up with terrible passwords. They're still using, we still see terrible security questions and stuff like a lot of that just needs to go away entirely.
What else did I want to talk about? There was another
PCs
story.
in the cloud.
Yes,
Windows 365.
that was the one. Thank you. You read my mind very well now.
I did.
Adrian.
I did. I have that power now. I didn't go to Armenia, but I'm part. Yeah.
That's it. I think this is really. I mean, this is where a lot of folks predicted Microsoft would be going. I thought it was, and still think, is the right direction for Microsoft. Of course, I think if you analyze that and we're believing in that, the announcement for Windows 11 kind of doesn't really make sense. I really thought that Windows 365 in the cloud would be their next kind of big, air quotes, operating system push, and not have a Windows 11. My guess is that customers pushed Microsoft to come out with another operating system, and Microsoft said, okay, we'll do that, but in conjunction, we're going to work on this new cloud PC thing, which I really think is the future.
I mean, the market's not ready for a full cloud deployment, right? We've been migrating to the cloud, but now we're migrating back where a hybrid approach is the smart approach. You're always going to have corporate needs that require physical hardware. You're going to have corporate assets that need to spend money on physical hardware. There's always going to be that physical aspect, and not to mention the consumer base, the gaming PCs, the regular end users, the users that have small businesses that are going to need consumer-grade laptops, desktops. So Windows 11, we knew that's probably going to be there. It's probably going to be Windows 13 or 14 before we see full maybe cloud push for that subscription level. But this is a good intermediary where maybe you have a hybrid solution that has an Azure Active Directory that you can deploy remote workers to these hybrid workstations in a cloud. That seems like a great use case. Or you've got very specific technologies or apps that you need to deploy and have a workstation. These are a step in the right direction, and it's something that we've been using for quite a while. With there's AWS that has this. There's a lot of VDI that went that way in the early days of virtualization. And so this is just the next iteration of that's going to be very integrated into their O365 and security suite, offer a lot of the advantages of the security of Microsoft with the Azure integration, with the ability to do that in a hybrid manner. So it's a natural evolution, and I think it's going to be one that's going to be adopted by very progressive people with very specific use cases for now. But I see this, being very useful for companies looking at evaluating hardware costs and maybe thinking about not having to do those, especially with work from home.
Yeah.
Well, and BYOD was never really a solved problem. I think a lot of people just kind of threw up their hands and are like, okay, people are just going to do work stuff on their personal systems. And desktop as a service is I think a great alternative to that, as long as it's kind of seamless and easy, because, people don't necessarily want to install your company antivirus on their personal system, or maybe they don't want to put Office on there.
It kind of bonds that zero trust as well, from the standpoint of maybe zero trust is too hard to get deployed, or like you said, end users are very hesitant to have an agent on their personal box, and corporate, like, they're still a little hesitant to adopt and trust fully that kind of zero trust model of zeroing in on those applications and connections. So this is I think a good intermediary that's going to solve some of those issues.
Yeah, I think we're coming down to it's like a VM that sits on top of whatever you want to run it on, right? And VMs are too clunky to do that for your end user. I think this solution speaks to that, where I can get my web browser, my Office 365 apps, and they're it's just a shim running in the operating system that gives most of the access to what's running in the cloud. You can put the browser there too. Great. Anytime you do anything, it's got to be in there.
And we've had to wait for internet speed and browser technology and stability and functionality to kind of catch up and be stable enough to handle each of these iterations, so that the end user experience is such that they don't really notice too much of a difference. Right. And I think that's kind of the precipice that we've finally reached. Oh
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've used Amazon Workspaces, which is a competitor here. Citrix has a competitor. And who else? VMware has one. And good desktop as a service is super slick. It's it's not for all use cases, but essentially you install an app, you log in, and boom, you've got an entire environment, and it's seamless enough that you can completely forget that it's not the system that you're sitting directly in front of. Where you do run into some issues is like YubiKeys don't work inside at least Amazon Workspaces. Like that was a question that came up with a CISO I know of, and I did some testing on my end, and it just the USB is very limited. Like it'll do obviously peripherals, keyboard, mouse, that kind of thing, and I think webcam, and beyond that. Like maybe a flash drive, but beyond that, you can't even use a hardware security key. So it'd be interesting to see if Microsoft can deliver a bit more functionality for some of those other use cases.
Yeah, I see a time where
most of those are solved.
What's that, Tyler?
Said most of those have been solved pretty well with WebSockets and that direct transparent hardware pass through. They've gotten a lot of that figured out. I think because of the VDI, right? They had all those problems with VDI and the ability to pass a lot of that through. With the web browser functionality and its hooks into the OS and hardware level now, it's pretty straightforward. And I don't think there's going to be some use cases like the hardware token is an interesting one that sometimes has issues, but I think Microsoft has got a lot of that figured out.
Yeah, I foresee a time where we get a Chrome OS kind of like Windows release in Windows 12 or 13, and there's no more like Home and Pro and all that stuff. Like you basically get two. There's the Chrome OS, which they could call like Surface OS, but they'll probably come up with some
Surface OS. It's got to be coming.
But they'll come up with some other ridiculous name for it because they're known for just creating new names for things. And then there'll be like Windows Professional or whatever, right? And that'll be for your AV needs, for your gamers, for people that need to run an actual operating system. And you'll just have two choices. You either run the cloud-enabled version or you run the professional version, and that's it. There won't be...
That's all synced up to your like O365 subscription base, whether you're Home, Business Plus, what OneDrive subscription you have, whether you get a workstation in the cloud that has the ability to do certain functions. I see like a whole subscription model that Microsoft is going to make very, very unclear.
Right. And I think it will solve a lot of those OS and application security issues we have today, but it's still not going to solve things like phishing and things like that.
Yeah, right, right. But it's a reduction of attack surface. Like they tried with Windows 10 S, and basically Windows 10 S was just Windows 10, except you can only get software through the Windows Store.
Yep.
And like almost everyone that bought a Windows 10 S device like paid the extra $10 or whatever you needed to pay
to get a real operating system.
Yeah, to unlock that restriction. But I mean, if you look at if you look at Mac mostly, and definitely the smartphone OSs, one of the things that reduces that attack surface is the fact that all the software going onto your device comes through a single chokehold, comes through a single app store, where there's some due diligence, some scanning being done to make sure that you're not going to be putting malware in your device. And Windows is one of the last operating systems to force that. Where Mac OS doesn't force it, you just have to jump through some hoops to, and same thing on Android, to install from a unknown source. They usually call it, but. Windows has been fairly open, and
I'd be remiss to say that if you abstract the applications like the Microsoft suite away from the OS, and this particular one will run on Linux, that next year could be the year of the Linux desktop. And I say that tongue in cheek, but I think the number one problem that you have when you run Linux as a desktop, and I have 3 of them, is the way that applications are installed and packaged is all over the map, and there's too many distributions that do it slightly differently. If I can run my Windows applications as like a shim and largely run them in the cloud, and the OS is independent of that, now I've got more freedom to choose my OS. So I think you could see a slight uptick in that.
And Azure has had that for a while, and I think that would be cool if they made it easier and more accessible to do, where you can actually just publish an application instead of having a whole desktop as a service.
Right.
You can do this today. For your organization, you can publish an application in Azure. Like, say there's a Windows application, that your staff just, a lot of folks really need, like. Maybe it's Adobe Illustrator. You've got a bunch of designers or something like that. And they don't want to use Inkscape on Linux, and you can just publish that app, and they can use the whole thing remotely. It's actually running on a Windows system somewhere, but on your Linux device, it's going to look like it's running natively.
And the problem I have with that stuff now cool. is if it's graphics and or video applications, that technology exists, but I think it's expensive to host all that stuff in the cloud. Because you get to pay continually, right? Rather than just spending $3,000 and building a workstation and you're done. Once we address that issue, I think I would love to not have to maintain as much hardware as we do here to do graphics and audio video editing, but it's cost prohibitive.
And it's getting more and more niche. I mean, most of the stuff that I would have put in that category has gone to SaaS. I mean, there's some really decent photo editing tools that are just entirely built into the web browser. So, there's less and less reasons to have to do something like that these days.
Cool.
The browsers, everything.
That's it. Well, coming up next, interviews from RSA Conference 2021 featuring Mark Rawls and Wayne Haber. Stick around.